Every year when summer comes round, off to the sea I go. I don't care if I do spend a pound, I'm rather rash, I know.
My visit to the English seaside resort town of Blackpool was a memorable one, to say the least. The most fitting way for me to tell this story is to start at the end, then loop back to the beginning and fill in the rest of the story in a non-linear fashion. It may sound like a strange way to tell a travel story, but I feel the end of this particular part of the story frames my visit to Blackpool appropriately. Think of this as the opening scene in Goodfellas, but with less murder. Just go with it.
With me little stick of Blackpool roar, along the promenade I stroll.
The McTravel trio, consisting of my brother Mark, our friend Gullidge, and myself, arrived at our bed and breakfast, the Saddle Inn in York, and were incredibly relieved to see the friendly, well-kept innkeeper and the well-furnished, clean, warm, and hospitable inn that he keeps. He took us in from the cold, dreary world outside and into the tavern he runs, above which our warm, soft, clean, stain-free beds were located. He checks us in and asks us about our travels in his home country thus far. We tell him of our journey from London to Bath, and he nods in understanding. London being a cosmopolitan world capital, and Bath being a postcard-perfect historic Roman spa town. We tell him that we then travel to Liverpool, and he nods warmly, understanding that we must be Beatles fans, for whom a trip to Liverpool must be something of a pilgrimage. We then tell him about our last destination, Blackpool, and his face becomes awash in alarm, confusion, and pity. He pauses for a moment, looking for the right words to convey the range of emotions on his weathered Yorkie face. "Blackpool, eh?" he says in a charmingly rugged Yorkshire accent, like Ned Stark in one of his warm fatherly scenes with one of his doomed children. The innkeeper pauses again, then says the words that sum up my entire experience in Blackpool. "Are you familiar with the phrase, shithole?" Yes, sir. Yes, I am. The phrase and the concept. Part 2. Let's pretend none of this ever happened. We arrived in Blackpool shortly after the end of our ride in the Magical Mystery Tour in Liverpool, as darkness had begun to set in on this salty beachside town. A mist hung over the streets like the evaporated hopes and dreams of all those condemned to wander its arcades and casinos in search of the sun and fun they vaguely remember from their long-faded youth. The glory of Blackpool's glamorous past at the turn of the 20th century as Britain's Coney Island have given way to its new title, Britain's Coney Island from the Warriors. In the early 1900s, Blackpool was a bustling tourist haven where the upper strata of British society could come to stroll its beachside promenade, enjoy the thrill of Sir Hiram Maxim's captive flying machine at the Blackpool Pleasure Beach amusement park, and splash around in the Irish Sea in ridiculous Victorian bathing suits and straw boater hats, taking care not to expose their scandalous ankles to avoid offending the Queen's delicate sensibilities. For decades, Blackpool was seen as the go-to vacation spot in England, but times soon changed, and the wealthy elite were drawn away from Britannia's shores to faraway lands where you might actually see sunlight. The upper class was replaced by the working class, who enjoyed an opportunity to have some fun in the sun in a way once reserved for only the richest fops and dandies. As travel became more affordable, the working class found they no longer had to settle for Britain's frigid waters and abandoned Blackpool as well, leaving the now diminished resort town to the dregs of society. Then the dregs realized they too could do better, and left as well, leaving only us on this rainy September evening. We were slightly disappointed to find that the Las Vegas of northern England we would be bedding down in for the night seemed more reminiscent of Atlantic City, without all the glitz and glamour of New Jersey. We then checked into our lodgings for the night. Now, I can't say that my complaints about the bed and breakfast we stayed at should qualify as a mark against the town of Blackpool, because I chose to stay at the cheapest room I could find. But it has to count as a mark against someone, because good God, this place was like a rat nest that would make a rat look around and realize he had finally hit rock bottom and needed to call his parents and get help. The bathroom was located down the hall, and the toilet was, for some reason, perched several feet above the floor, which, unless you are Wilt the Stilt Chamberlain, means your feet are going to dangle while you sit like a child getting his first haircut. I feel like this was an ironic punishment from Dante's Inferno for damned germaphobes who hoped they wouldn't have to make physical contact with the toilet seat. Here is a sink that didn't work, helpfully located in the corner of our room. Had it worked, it would have been even more helpful, as compulsive and rigorous hand cleaning was all I could think about during my stay. Here were our flophouse-style beds, complete with astringent leopard print pillowcases and worn-out stained mattresses. When I think about where those stains came from, my mind goes to dark places. Here is a third bed, with a little more room, so you can sit at the end of it and gaze out the window while smoking a cigarette, monologuing about all the harrowing events that have led you to this place. Blackpool. Shit. I'm still in Blackpool. You know, something like that. A bare light bulb and names carved into the ceiling are always signs that you've landed at a top-notch bed and breakfast. Or a police interrogation room where lots of men with guilty consciences hanged themselves. So while I have, in my younger years, stayed at some shabby hostels during my travels, Hotel 7 in Blackpool has to be the worst place I've ever stayed. I promise you that you can do better, even in Blackpool.
So stay out. You understand? Stay out.
Many of you, especially British people, may be wondering why I chose to visit Blackpool in the first place, what with it being a decrepit cesspool and all. It is a fair and logical question, with an answer that I do believe explains my decision, yet still falls woefully short of adequacy. In my research to prepare for this epic road trip across Great Britain, I had stumbled across a website advertising a festival called Blackpool Illuminations, where bright and colorful lights are stretched up and down the promenade from the North Pier to the South Pier, and enchanting old-style choo-choo trains tug along cars full of mesmerized tourists. Sounds like a British version of the Main Street Electrical Parade at Disney World, right? Technically, this was correct. I just underestimated how British it would be. I think you can guess by the tenor of this article so far that the light display did not live up to my expectations. Somehow, the inclusion of these colorful Christmas lights on this dilapidated boardwalk area only served to make it more depressing. There is always the possibility that Blackpool would look better by the light of day, but I have a feeling this is not the case. The harsh sunlight struggling through the midday overcast would only serve to highlight the cracks in the facade of this industrial age wonderland. The fact that travel guru and my own personal god, Rick Steves, recommends this place in his PBS show only proves that no matter how kind and loving your khaki-wearing god may seem, all gods have a well of cruelty hiding beneath their mask of benevolence. Part 3. Eat the lemons. Those were my first impressions, at least. Disappointment is a powerful elixir, and it can cast a shade over your entire trip if you let it. If you thought that after all this verbose ranting about how depressing and bleak Blackpool is meant I didn't make the most of my time there, then I gotta tell you, you just don't know Steve McTravel. If I have one mantra, it is this. When life gives you lemons, eat those lemons. And keep in mind what a hilarious story it will be when you someday tell your friends about the time you ate lemons. Take in every detail of that awful lemon. Savor how awful that tartness is and the feeling of the burning citric acid when it gets in your eye. Remember it all and enjoy the experience of tasting that bitter fruit, knowing others would have just gone hungry in your situation. That whole metaphor kind of got away from me, but my point is this. When things on a trip seem bleak, try to keep things in perspective. At least you're not at work, right? If things seem shitty, embrace the shittiness. Lean into the calamity and enjoy it for the great story it will someday be. Don't wallow in misery, revel in misery. The McTravel trio decided to make the most of our stay in that cold, sweaty armpit of Britain, and we wound up having the most fun of our trip, just walking the streets and taking some fabulous novelty photos. We were like kids at a run-down amusement park, sparsely populated by drunk zombies. What more could a kid ask for? In many ways, Blackpool actually reminds me of my own New England childhood summer getaway of Hampton Beach, New Hampshire. It's just an hour or so north of Boston, and home to the same blue-collar luxuries that Blackpool offers, such as dingy casinos, grimy beach food, arcades full of worn, outdated games and prizes, and the sweet aroma of beer-battered, sunblock-encrusted, freckle-shouldered laborers unwinding after a hard lifetime of slaving away for those asshole bosses. Blackpool felt just like the Hampton Beach of my childhood, a true judgment-free zone where beach bodies were somehow both pasty and sunburnt at the same time, and riddled with barbed wire tattoos and tramp stamps. Young and old alike were bedecked in sleeveless airbrush t-shirts which touted their proud ethnic heritage, or a Rastafarian Bart Simpson smoking a joint. Once I choked down the bitter disappointment that was Blackpool, I started to feel right at home. The illuminations were still underwhelming, but I found a few spots that almost matched the splendor I saw in photographs. Not to mention, the dark and rain-slick streets made these colorful lights only shine brighter than they would have in a less damp and musty town. The lights may not rival Las Vegas, but at least it's not in the desert, which is harsh on my pale Irish skin. When I started to accept the gloomy atmosphere I found myself in, I began enjoying my time much more, even to the point of spotting some bright stars in the otherwise pitch black that is Blackpool. One visitor's guide I had read boasted of Blackpool's, quote, ubiquitous chippies, which are both words that I had to look up. It turns out ubiquitous is a fancy word for ever-present, and a chippy is either a fish and chip shop or a prostitute. I certainly saw more fish and chip shops than prostitutes, but that may be because I was hungry. As we continued wandering, we came across a shop which specialized in novelty photo sessions, where you and hopefully some friends or family get to dress up as their choice of historical or fantasy figures, such as cowboys, gangsters, Victorian gentlemen, fairies, pirates, or a big fat gypsy wedding. Normally, this would be the type of place 3 grown men traveling abroad would pass right by in favor of more adult fare, such as the ubiquitous chippies, the other kind. But this was not a normal occasion. These 3 grown men were going to enjoy Blackpool in all its tacky glory, and this was just the place to do it. So we met the proprietors of this photographic fantasy laboratory, a lovely Polish brother and sister duo, and while the brother was finishing up a set with a nice family of pirates, the sister was offering us their traditional photo set options. She, in her naivete, assumed that we were the average American tourists who simply wanted to pretend to be cowboys, which all Americans were anyway. The McTravel trio had a different, bolder idea. We didn't want to pick one option, we wanted them all. We looked at the list of costumes and each picked a different outfit from a different set. I, your main man Steve McTravel, chose to be a proper Victorian gentleman. My brother Mark chose to be a slick Prohibition-era gangster, and our pal Gullidge chose to be an Old West sheriff minus the sleeves. The process of taking these photos proved to be the most fun we had on our entire 2-week trip. We absorbed nothing about a culture different from ours, saw no beautiful scenery, and learned absolutely nothing, but damn was it fun. We chose to have a big fat gypsy wedding as our backdrop, because conventional costume photos are for suckers. Give me a Victorian gangster cowboy fat gypsy wedding or give me death. It took a little while to get the sister on board with our idea, but at some point our giddy, childlike laughter must have become contagious because she began giggling and laughing and coming up with ideas of her own. She decided that what our giant wedding cake set needed was some guns and bags of money strewn about like we had just pulled off the heist of a lifetime and subsequently decided to profess our love for one another and enter the bonds of holy matrimony. After her brother finished with the pirate family, he joined our eclectic little band of time-traveling, bank-robbing, star-crossed lovers, and, needless to say, he required a bit of explanation. But before we knew it, he was part of the party, having a grand time coming up with wacky scenarios and laughing at what a bunch of crazy American weirdos we were. But he did laugh. That's all that matters to me. After our impromptu photo session, we were back on the streets of Blackpool, full of mirth. Even in the grim face of England's most depressing vacation getaway, it is impossible to keep the McTravel trio down. So now whenever I tell people I went to Blackpool and they say, "Dear God, why?" I can respond, to take funny pictures, look at colorful lights, and make surreal but lasting memories. And in the end, that was enough. Rick Steves truly works in mysterious ways. Well, that's the tale of my trip to Blackpool, England, a town where people remember what fun is, but only vaguely. They don't remember how to have it, but they definitely have a strong feeling that they used to have it there, once, when they were young. If you take one lesson away from this, let it be that you can make any trip, no matter how disastrous, a fun-filled adventure you will never forget, as long as you keep a positive attitude and lower your standards. So would I recommend Blackpool to somebody going on a trip to England? No, absolutely not. I wouldn't recommend Blackpool to somebody from England who had never seen the ocean before. But there are a lot of Blackpools in the world, and our travel time is too precious to waste by not enjoying even the crummiest of destinations. So make the most of it no matter where you are. This philosophy can probably apply to life too, but I don't know. I haven't thought about it that much. Anyway, what do I know? I'm a freaking security guard. Well, see you next time.